Just got a bit of time to go through a load of questions. There's been some fantastic questions in the chat, by the way. Well done, everyone. And some questions that you think, hang on, that's really obvious. How do we know that? And have made me kind of think. So one of those that I'm going to hit you up with, start with, Emma. Simon asked, well, given that we can't actually send and receive light from these stars, how do we actually know that that light's taken 8 minutes, a year, 20,000 years to actually reach us? I think the answer is geometry, isn't it?
It's wavelength. So it's a really good question. And if I'm honest, it's something that took me several years to get my head around as a PhD student. But it's actually relatively simple. It's that we calculate, okay, we know that this radiation was emitted at 21 centimeters in wavelength, really small. We know we can calculate using maths that traveling 13 billion years of expansion in space-time, it stretched it to 2 meters. So we know that signal is 2 meters. So all we do is we tune in our radio telescopes to a wavelength of exactly 2 meters. That is the signal from the first stars. The problem is that as the listener has basically said, how do we know it's the right one? And that's exactly what I was saying, is that it's piled on top of all the other stuff that's got a wavelength of 2 meters, and that's so much. Like we can measure covert aircraft, for example, that we're not meant to know about. There's wonderful stories about that. We've got real problems with LOFAR with animals. So the farmer next door that doesn't particularly like LOFAR very much put electric tags on his cows and electric fences up. That's really noisy. There's just been a new wind farm constructed by LOFAR, and it has caused havoc because of electromagnetic interference. So excellent question. That's how we tell, but how do we tell? It's about gently brushing off the signal because it looks a bit different.
When we talk about interference, I'm reminded the classic story is that the first scientists that detected the cosmic microwave background actually thought it was pigeon poo on their antenna. Is this actually true?
This is actually true, and I devote like a chapter to this.
I'm so glad it's not
because
made
it's
up.
my favourite story. Yes, this is a story of how they actually detected the cosmic microwave background in the 60s. And to cut it very short, yes, this is what happened. They turned on their telescope. They measured this very strange noise, very strange fizzing, as it were, scientifically. Like, where on earth is this radio signal coming from? And they just exhausted themselves with trying to find out whether it was a switch gone wrong or something, until eventually they saw 2 pigeons nestling in the telescope. And so again, there's a bit of back and forth on this. They get a shotgun, they get rid of the pigeons, and they clean out the entire telescope, and they switch it on, and guess what they hear? Exactly the same fizzing. And eventually, yeah, it turns out that it's what they are experiencing is the radiation from the cosmic microwave background. So yeah, 2 pigeons down, but scientifically much better for it.
So another question that somehow struck me as a bit like, oh, how do we know that? Tim Miles asked, but why can't the galaxies which you think are further away just have different elements in them? How do we know how much has been shifted? And that's again due to the wavelengths, is it? Because we can work out.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So how do you know there's the same elements in each galaxy? That's a really good point. We know that the nucleosynthesis, which is when lots of the first elements were created, how they were created in the first stars. So we can calculate what kind of things could be created. And it happened all over our universe, as far as you know, because we came from such a small thing, kind of everything happened everywhere, if that makes sense. And then there's no reason to believe that it would be massively different in any other part. But it's mainly by going into the laboratory, by irradiating lots of the chemical elements that we can find and finding them out. But it's nothing is easy in this field, to be honest, because you're absolutely right. You can have overlapping lines. You can have calcium that creates, or iron rather, that can create like 16 different lines. And so, yeah, it's like trying to untangle a slinky or something, it's really, really hard. But yeah, otherwise we wouldn't get paid, I guess, to go in every day.
So Ask McNeil asked a question. You kind of casually were like, oh yeah, and the Andromeda Galaxy is on a collision course with us, and that's why. And you sort of laughed. And then so Espen said, so why is that? And then mathematics also then said, well, won't the sun just become a giant red giant, and that'll just long absorb all life on Earth way before the Andromeda Galaxy collides with us, which is kind of good, but also terrifying. Should I be worried about either of these two things happening?
So yeah, firstly, I said it casually and laughed because then I realised there might be kids watching and I didn't want to make everybody cry. So that's why I suddenly stopped. And I also think I said the sun would supernova, which is completely wrong, and they're going to take my PhD away. It is indeed going to go red giant. Which means that it's going to get very, very, very large, very, very red and puffy, and it will encompass the Earth. There's no nice way to say that. 4.5 billion years away. You know, it's not our problem. With Andromeda, the reason it's the exception to all of the galaxies moving away is because it's been caught in our local, very attractive gravitational field, and so it just happens to be close enough that our gravitational pull on small scales is larger than the overall pull of like the expansion of space-time, if you will. So it's the exception, but yes, it is coming towards us. What is interesting though is that it won't be an explosion. This is the one thing I found very interesting about it anyway, is that the stars are all so far apart in a galaxy, actually realistically, when two galaxies come together, they actually almost do that. And there's very few collisions and fiery explosions. Of course, there will be a lot of gravitational distortion because you've got lots of pulling and pushing. But in terms of explosions, it's probably going to be quite calm, and we'll just end up being a nice elliptical galaxy.
So while we're on the subject of galaxies, Lawrence asked, did the stars or the galaxies form first? What's kind of the current thinking?
Yeah, this is really recent thinking, actually. And so it's the stars. So the first stars formed, and they formed alone or with just a few siblings, which was a beautifully enigmatic idea just all across the universe. The reason that you couldn't form a galaxy at that time is because they lived such short lifetimes that before a galaxy could even really, before the stars could really even get together, they exploded. And it's only when you've got that second generation of stars that lived, well, still living now, 9, 10 billion, 13 billion years later, it's only then that you can create a galaxy, which by one definition that I subscribe to anyway, is that it's not transient, is that it can survive the feedback that's going on in the universe, because there's no point if the galaxy suddenly lots of stars supernova and it blows the whole galaxy apart. It's not a galaxy then. So first galaxies are thought to have formed around, well, several hundred million years after the Big Bang. So maybe, 500 million years, rule of thumb. But these are really, really uncertain timelines within that billion years that are lost. And that's why it's so exciting to figure out where exactly stuff happened.
So while we're on the development of that early universe, Russell talks about black holes, and they developed at the same time as early stars, and why is that?
Yeah, I'm going to keep saying this. Another great question, and this is why I like astrophysics, is because people get really intimidated by it, but actually it is about sitting there and going, what? On a daily basis. It's brilliant because we don't have a laboratory, so we literally just get to sit there and go like, okay, so the first black holes, what we thought up until a few years ago is that the first black holes would only begin being in existence when the first stars supernovaed and there was kind of something left which became a black hole. So it's too much now to go into all of this mechanics, but normally you would create a black hole by a star coming to its end of its life and imploding in on itself, either by exploding first and then imploding, or who cares. That's how you would normally do it. So you would normally think, okay, the first black holes will mostly come about at the deaths of those stars. Let's say, I don't know, put me on the spot, 500 million years again after the Big Bang. In the last few years, there has been a little bit more interest in what's called direct collapse black holes, which is the idea that in the early universe, the gas was so hot that it couldn't condense into small enough gas clouds to create a star. And so actually a few of these clouds managed to accrete more and more matter until we have an incredibly massive gas cloud, which when it does cool down due to the expansion of the universe, contracts right through the protostar stage. Like, it doesn't even get time to become a star. It crashes down on itself and makes a direct collapse black hole. And that would happen much earlier, like 150, 180 million years after the Big Bang. And that's vital because we don't understand black holes very well. So, for example, in the center of the Milky Way, and a lot of spirals, most spirals, is what we call a supermassive black hole. Really giant. And we cannot figure out how they got that big. It's like your 14-year-old niece turning up at Christmas looking like a 50-year-old. It's really weird. But if direct collapse black holes did exist, then that almost skips a growth generation, and it could explain it, which is why it's really, really interesting.
Oh, that's absolutely fascinating. There's a couple of I guess I'd call them social questions about the big issues of the day. So I think I'll put those to you. So Shami asks, will Brexit affect your work in the Netherlands?
Oh, wow. Okay, so on a day-to-day basis, no. Superficially, I will still get paid if that's what you're asking. Don't panic.
Good.
But in terms of whether I will still be able to work with it in, say, 10 years, it's a bit more of a difficult topic because currently a huge amount of the research money comes from what we call the European Research Council. It's where a lot of our money comes from. I forget by how much, but the majority. And that is under no guarantee of being still available to us in a few years. So British, UK astronomy, UK research, UK science is unclear. There are uncertain times ahead. Here be dragons, put it that way.
So now for a more cheery question. How about so obviously these days astronomers don't just go down to their local telescope and look through the eyepiece and look at the early Big Bang. So I guess you can do a lot of stuff remotely and via laptops. But how much is coronavirus affecting the work that you do, and I guess sort of space research more generally? That's from Sophia, by the way. Thanks for that question.
Again, a great question. It depends on the telescope. So I can only really speak in terms of the optical ones where you have to go up a mountain in Chile and actually look at this kind of stuff, mountain in Tenerife, sorry, then but those have had to shut down in most places. But radio telescopes are by nature remotely controlled, because you've got 130,000 antennas. You've got to find a way of you actually control this in Melbourne or whatever. And because we've had 10 years of data to go through, we've had plenty of stuff to do. So actually, on a day-to-day basis, my job hasn't changed at all. It's and we're still having international Zooms. We've been very lucky.
So back to radio telescopes. So Chris Lee asks, how will satellite constellations affect the square kilometre array results? Do people call it SCAR, by the way? I just want to call it SCAR, but does everyone call it SKA?
People call it SCAR, but they're looked at strangely.
Okay.
So yeah, it is SKA. Yeah, I don't know why. It's just one of those acronyms that normally you have an acronym so you can bend it like that. But this is the one which people are like, ooh, that doesn't doesn't look good. Yeah, what was your question?
So the question was about Elon Musk and his Starlink project and all that kind of stuff. Are these twinkling satellites going to affect both radio telescopes and optical telescopes and all of the telescopes, or is it
all of the telescopes pretty much? I could give you a long personal opinion here, but I will be wary of the fact that he's a fellow of the Royal Society who pays me. Yes, it affects it. Yes, there are scientific papers being put out right now which talk about how to mitigate it. We will mitigate it. It just makes life a lot harder and means that you can take observations to get the same payoff from the observations takes longer. Because
presumably you can predict where they're going to be and then just minus that from your things, but that's quite hard.
Well, it's deleting data. So if you imagine you need 100 bits of data to make this discovery and you have to delete 58 of those bits of data because a nice bright shiny thing has gone through it makes things a lot harder.
Right, I'm gonna move on before we say something too controversial. And there's a question from Garth here, which I think is one for the astronomy heads. So he asks, where would the first stars lie on the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram? Now, of course, I obviously know exactly what a Hertzsprung-Russell diagram is, of course, but for people that maybe don't understand, could you also explain what that is?
Yeah, Hertzsprung-Russell diagram. Oh gosh, do you mind if I actually skip this one a little bit, because they wouldn't lie on it, or we wouldn't be quite sure, because the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram looks at the different colours of light, and that's classified in a stellar system which isn't used on the first stars, so it would be a bit too difficult to go into. I'm really sorry about that, but please email me. And we can have a longer discussion, but it's a good question, but yeah.
Oh, another good question. I'm just going through the chat now. There's another good question from Peter, who asks, how long did those earlier stars live for?
About 100 million years, we think. So again, depends on their mass. What we think is that there was quite a wide range of masses that they were created on, but what we call top heavies, which means that the more massive stars were the most popular. And so they could have lived anywhere from 13 billion years to 1 million years, but rule of thumb, 100 million years, which is really small compared to the 9 billion years of the average sun around now, average star.
So Thomas asks two questions. One of them is that Totoro in the background?
Yes, it is. It's my calling card for cool people. So well done. You've won the trophy.
And then he also asks a slightly philosophical question where he says, is the singularity of a black hole the closest you can get to a truly one-dimensional point in space? Which I think, yes.
Wowzers. Yeah, but it's also where mathematics itself breaks down. And so the idea of dimensions breaks down. And so everything breaks down. And this is why I talk about the Big Bang as preposterous, which I stand by. It is, and this is why it took us decades to actually agree with it, because it goes against everything in our mind, but all the evidence points to it. So what can you do? But can we explain it?
So James Williams asked a question where he says, I've seen a claim that there are some objects that are older in the universe, such as the Methuselah star. I don't know what that is. Have you heard of this? How is that possible?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question. What was it? That there's some objects older than the universe?
Yeah.
Oh, I can't remember why that is now. Oh, yeah, you put me on the spot here. Oh, it's not my area. So it's a trick of the light, basically. I know enough to say that there are no objects that are older than the universe. I can't remember the exact reasoning for this. It's an optical illusion of space, almost. It's a mind trick to do with how long that part of space has been expanding, I'm going to make a fool of myself, but yeah, apologies, but it's an optical illusion that I don't really remember.
So Peter has also been asking another question that, as you're sort of more of an experimentalist than a theorist, I'm not quite sure if this is one for you. But he says, how do we know that light travels at the same speed in all directions? Since when we measure it, there's usually a round trip speed. I mean, I think it's probably seems to work.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. In all directions. So we've measured the speed of light in many different ways, and we've measured its effect on us in many different ways. So, for example, that time slows down the faster. Well, yeah, you can say that. Time slows down the faster you travel. For example, we've shown that by putting a clock on a really fast aeroplane and noticing that it's a few seconds slow when it comes back down. So I don't know what, in terms of different directions, you mean, because certainly in the 3 dimensions of space that we know it, it's all cumulatively together. It's the speed of light, and then you've got the 4th dimension is time. So this is a brilliant special relativity question, and probably not one that I can go into more detail than that. But in the dimensions we know of, it all the speed all sums to 300 meters per second, 300 million meters per second.
So before we go, I'm just trying to find the comment. Actually, it's one of those terrible things where people say more of a comment than a question. But this is actually really nice. It was someone who said, "Oh, can I find it?" I've just discovered that when you won the very early career Women Physics Award, the prize giving was Dr. Kate Shaw, who was a guest lecturer. Small world. I'm her mum. Says Rose in the comments. So
nice. Well, my mum is listening tonight, so there you go.
Well, hello, Mrs. Chapman, and hello everyone out there watching. I think that's probably time to sort of start bringing things to a close. I think we've had some fantastic questions. Thank you so much for all of them. I'm just gonna let you know about a few things. As you know, you can join the Royal Institution as a member or a patron. And so, yeah, if you can spare the suggested donation or more, then that's absolutely appreciated by everyone that works at the Royal Institution. First Light by Emma Chapman. I have it here. I forgot to show it earlier. Here it is. It looks absolutely lovely. So I do advise you all to go out and grab your copy now. As I say, we've got links in the chat to your local Amazon, but also please do consider going out and supporting your local bookshop. So Emma, you mentioned people can contact you via email. Is there any other places where people can find you and contact you and get in touch? They've got more questions to ask. I think you're muted.
Oh, that's clever, isn't it? Yeah. So I said that I'm on Twitter quite a lot, so you can always catch me on there, probably more than email, sadly. Yeah, my handle is Dr. E.O. Chapman, and I will try and keep an eye on it and yeah, get back to you.
Fantastic. And just say to everyone, thank you all so much for watching. We've really appreciated all your fantastic questions. And yeah, we'll see you again on Thursday. Take care. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.